South Africa prepares to move to level 3 of the lockdown on the 1st of June. Former British MP Lord Peter Hain is warning our government not to follow the United Kingdom's approach to COVID-19. He joins us now from Wales to tell us why. Good evening, Lord Hain. Thank you very much for your time. Now, you've written an article for the Daily Maverick, and you say that we really shouldn't follow what the United Kingdom has done. Is that because they took so long to go into lockdown and close their schools?
That was the first big mistake. Boris Johnson dithered as the Sunday Times, which has generally been friendly to his newspaper, the UK Sunday Times, reported yesterday in a detailed investigative article. He spent a long time dithering whilst the virus was spreading rampantly around Europe. Italy had already had 1,000 deaths. It was spreading in Spain. It had obviously already been in East Asia, China, Korea, and so on. And he didn't take the necessary decisive lockdown decision that, for example, President Ramaphosa did in South Africa. But that was just the start of being late. We were late to get in Britain the necessary personal protective equipment. That was very late coming on stream, so that many doctors and consultant doctors and nurses and care workers and hospital workers died unnecessarily. And then we were late to get to the testing regime that Germany had introduced early, for example. South Korea had introduced early. And we're only now beginning to get towards some kind of tracing system. So at every stage of the crisis, Britain has proved not a good example for South Africa or any other country, for that matter, to follow.
You know, it's so difficult, I think, to lead in these times because we don't quite know what we're dealing with. You know, you can be criticised for dithering, but you can also be criticised for a knee-jerk reaction. So I'm wondering why do you think Boris Johnson took so long? Do you think that he was thinking about the right course ahead, or did he take a different approach that actually they realised wasn't working?
Well, I can't answer for him. You'd have to put that question to him if you had a chance. But what is very clear, and of course this is difficult, this is horrendously difficult, this is the worst pandemic the world has faced since the Spanish flu 100 years ago. And we are a much more integrated world now. With all the millions of flights. For example, 3 million flights came into London Heathrow Airport, Britain's premier airport, in March alone, at a time when other countries were closing their airports to foreign visitors. And these flights came from China and the European Union, including Italy and Spain and other countries, which had very high and escalating death rates and infection rates. So I think it's hard to put yourself in his frame of mind. But what is clear is he didn't follow the path that other leaders have followed. For example, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who I think has been exemplary about decisive action, but also showing empathy and understanding for the incredibly difficult circumstances that people have faced as a result of this. And at every point, the decision was made too late. And of course, on top of that, in Britain, we'd faced 10 years of cuts to our health service in real terms, and the loss of over 100,000 doctors, nurses, care workers, and other clinical staff. So we were not in a position to do what Germany did so decisively. And the results are very clear. The results are very clear. We have the highest death rate in Europe, significantly higher than anybody else. Germany's got a fraction of our death and infection rate, and a very similar sized population. Why? Because they took decisive action. They invested in personal protection equipment to protect hospital doctors and nurses and other clinical staff and hospital workers. They invested in a proper testing regime from the start to track down who had got the virus and isolate them, and then to trace the spread as well. We've done none of those things early enough. We've come belatedly to all of these things, and it's showing with one of the highest death rates in the world and by far now the highest in Europe. And it's a very, very tragic and sorry story of how not to handle this crisis.
Deciding on a lockdown is a massive decision for any government. Emerging from a lockdown, though, is arguably a lot trickier. And even President Ramaphosa, who was absolutely praised at the beginning of our lockdown for acting firmly and quickly, has been absolutely slammed for the way the regulations have been imposed, for things that have angered people. I'm just wondering about the lessons, perhaps, for emerging from a lockdown, because it seems that it's a lot harder to do.
This is exactly one of the points I make in my Daily Maverick article earlier today, that getting out of lockdown is a hell of a lot harder, to use the phrase I did, than going into it. And we are finding that now. I mean, our businesses, our shops, our bars and restaurants, our leisure sector, our holiday sector has been decimated or put into some kind of limbo at best. And getting out of it is very hard when you do not have the capacity to test and to trace the spread of the virus and isolate it on the scale that you need. But other countries have started to emerge. Germany started to go back, France has started to go back, Italy, Spain, and the examples in this, I suppose, across the world would be New Zealand, but then New Zealand is an island. But they've dealt with the problem very effectively. So has South Korea, and so has Germany. So there are models, and Denmark, for that matter, unlike Sweden next door, has a record to follow. I mean, I'm not across all the detail of the regulations about lifting the lockdown that the president is enforcing in South Africa, and I have seen the criticisms, but unless you've got a testing and tracing regime, you risk a second wave, and I guess that is very much on his mind, because of South Africa, compared with Britain, is in much more difficult circumstances, with millions living in congested shanty or informal settlements and former townships from the old apartheid era, with poverty and unemployment widespread, with lack of sanitation and running water for still far too many people as a legacy of apartheid and the Zuma decade of corruption and state capture. So South Africa is facing a hugely more difficult challenge, but at the moment, I think we will see what the future holds, because who knows what it holds with this pandemic. I think it's handling it, and the president is handling it certainly better than Prime Minister Boris Johnson has handled it here in Britain.
Thank you very much. That was a former British MP, well-known anti-apartheid activist Lord Peter Hain, joining us there from Wales. I suppose the question is, how do we save lives and livelihoods? And there certainly aren't any easy answers.